Hello guys, so if you've been following this channel, you know that I have a 1 hour long tutorial on JavaScript. So in this video, we'll be putting that knowledge to work by building one of the common real world situations, which is the login process. So in this video, we'll build a login page and a dashboard page. Then in the login page, we'll just go through the login process where we validate the user's details, that is the username and the password. Then once the validation is correct, then we'll take the user to the dashboard page. So without wasting any time, let's get right into it. So the first thing you want to do is to create a new folder on your desktop. So just go on your desktop, then right click, then create a new folder. Then you can name this anything. I'm gonna name it login process. So login process, like that. Then double click on this folder, which will open this Explorer panel. So over here we are using Visual Studio Code, so it has an option to directly open the Visual Studio Code inside that folder that we're in. So right now we are inside this login process folder. So over here we're gonna right click, then go to show more options. If you don't see open with code, you can go to show more options, as in my case over here. So I'm gonna click on that, then it'll show me this open with code. Then it will open Visual Studio Code in that folder, which is the login process folder over there. I'm just gonna close that welcome page. So right now, the first thing that we wanna do is to create two files, which will be the login page and the dashboard page, right? So you're gonna create the login page. So say login.html. Then we're gonna create another file, which will be the dashboard.html. Then we're gonna focus on the login page first. So inside this HTML file, we're just gonna press or hold shift, then press the exclamation mark, which will give us this boilerplate. So if you see this option, just click on that, it will give us this boilerplate. So that's all we need. Then we're just gonna name this login for the title of the page. Inside the body, the only things that we need is the username input, the password input, and the submit button. Also, you also need the error message, which will show at the top whenever we make a mistake while we're logging in. So usually you see this at the top, or you see a pop-up once you log in and there's something wrong with your login details, right? So over here we just create a container, which will be a div with the class of container. So we just type a dot, then container, that will be the class. It will just give you everything over here. So just typing a dot, then the name of your class, that will give us a div, right? So inside this div, we're gonna have those inputs and the submit button or the login button, right? So the reason I have this container over here is because I'm gonna include some CSS which I've pre-written. So we're not gonna focus on CSS right now. So I've pre-written some CSS which I'll just inject in the HTML file, which will style everything. So we need this container class to actually style everything that's inside there. So over here we just say input, which will be type of text, then the placeholder will be the username. Then we also need a password, then it'll be type of password, so that the text is not visible. You just be dots while you're typing, right? So we also need a button, like I said. So this button will be we have an ID of submit btn, so that'll be the ID of the button. Then over here we just say log in. Then over here, yeah, the placeholder is fine, and over here it's fine. We just need the IDs. So for the username, we'll say username, then the ID of the password, we just say pass, just to shorten everything. We just say pass, right? Then like I said, we also need some error message which will display once the details that the user has entered are wrong, or something is wrong with whatever they're doing, right? Just to show them where they made their mistake, right? So we'll have a paragraph with the ID of error message. So instead of this, we're just gonna write error MSG just to shorten it. So just say error dash msg for the error message, right? So yeah, then now you're gonna open the page using live server. If you don't have the live server, you can just go to the extensions over here. So click over here, then you can search for live server. Then this is the one, live server. So this is what you need to install just to run your application in the browser, and it will refresh automatically once you make a change in your page or in your code, right? So yeah, that's what we need. So also we need SAS live compiler. SAS live compiler. So we need this live SAS compiler. So also install this so that you can compile our SAS. So we'll be using SAS instead of plain CSS. So this is just to make our code easier to write. So we'll use this SAS compiler to actually compile our SAS code into CSS, like the vanilla CSS. So we need this as well, so install that. So those are the only two extensions that we'll be using. So right now, once you've installed the live server, you'll have this option at the bottom here, which says click to run live server. Or when you right click in your HTML file, we'll have this option which says open with live server. So just click on that, which should open a new tab over here, as you can see, in your tab in your browser, which will have whatever code is in your HTML, right? So as you can see, it doesn't really look nice. So actually I'm gonna zoom in to about 175 so you can see. So we have that. So we're gonna include the CSS right now that I've pre-written, so I'll just do a copy and paste for the CSS, right? But actually what we're gonna do is just below the title, we're gonna link our CSS over here. So say ./ which will reference whatever files are in this current folder. Then we're gonna say style.css. So right now we don't have any CSS files over here, or this CSS file specifically. So create that by just typing style.scss. So that's not really CSS, just the SAS. So we write our SAS code over here, then the live SAS compiler will compile everything into vanilla CSS, which will be referenced over here. So not referencing this file, we're referencing the file that will be created once we run that live SAS compiler, right? So yeah, now I'm gonna paste the code over here. If you want to actually access this CSS, I'm gonna link the GitHub link, which will take you to the GitHub repo that we have everything that I'm doing right now in the description, right? So yeah, I'm gonna paste the SAS code over here. So now I've pasted the SAS code over here. So this is all the code that we need for everything just to look a bit nicer, right? So if I refresh over here, which should be refreshed automatically, we don't see the CSS, but we have referenced the CSS over here. That's because we don't have any CSS file over here. We don't have any style.css file over there. We have style.scss, not style.css, right? So all we need to do to solve this is to use our live SAS compiler, which will create the CSS file for us to actually to access it there. So we'll have this option over here once you install the live SAS compiler in the extensions panel, right? So just gonna click over that. Actually, I think we need to go in this file, which is the CSS file. Then we need to click on that option. Then as you can see, it has created two files, which are style.css and style.css.map. We don't really need to worry about this. All we need is this file, which is style.css, which is what we're referencing over here. So once we click on that option, it will create this file, which will have the vanilla CSS. So it will take everything that we have over here and just make it to be vanilla CSS, right? So now everything should look nice. As you can see, we have the CSS to have some styling basically. So now we're gonna focus on the logic. Actually, we need to work on this file over here, which is the dashboard.html. So just gonna go to the dashboard.html file, do the same thing by holding shift, then press exclamation mark, then press enter. It will create this boilerplate, so it will give you everything that you need. Then we just call this dashboard. Then over here we'll do the same thing by referencing the container class. Then inside here we only need one thing, which is the paragraph, which has the ID of welcome message, so just shorten it to welcome msg. Then that's all we need, so we can save the file. So yeah, we have this file. I can just change the URL there to dashboard to see how it looks like. So it will just be this blank page over here because we don't have anything inside this paragraph, but to see something we can actually do that. Then we can refresh, then we see that, right? So that's the dashboard. So also what we need is to reference that CSS file, so we need to link it by saying a dot then /, then navigate to the CSS file. Then if you save it, which you have this nice shadow there, then this will be the message over here. Then yeah, that's all we need right now. So now we need to focus on the JavaScript, which is what we came here for. So that was just for having basically the foundation of our code, right? So now we're gonna create two JavaScript files, which will be the login.js and dashboard.js, right? The login.js file will have all the logic for the login. Then the dashboard.js file will have the logic for actually when you navigate to the dashboard, which will happen when you click the submit or the login button, which will take you to the dashboard page. So in that page, that will be handled by the dashboard.js file. So we need to create two files, which should be the login.js, then another one called dashboard.js. So the first one that we need is the login.js file. So the first thing that we need to do is to reference the elements that we need for the whole login process. So that will be the error message for displaying the error message. We'll also need the username input field for actually allowing the user to enter their username, and the password field for entering the password, and also the submit button, which will trigger everything when they click on it, right? So to reference or to select everything, I'm gonna enter some comment here to select everything. So select elements. So this is just a comment. So the first element that we're gonna reference is the error message. So we're gonna create a variable called error msg, which will be document get element by ID. Then we're gonna get the error -msg. So this will just reference what we have in the login page. It should be this ID over here, which is error msg. So we're just saying element document.get element by ID, then we get in that element, which will reference this paragraph over here. So we have access to that paragraph. So now we also need the username field. So we say username would be document.get element by ID again, and I think we call it username, so we just write username there. Then we also need the password. So actually what we can do to make things easy, we can just go to this line over here, wherever you want to go to. So put your cursor on this line, then press shift and alt, then press the arrow down, which will copy everything where your cursor is to below. So it will copy whatever is above here to below. So we're just going to change this to pass for the password, which has the ID of pass. So over here we have the ID of pass, then also have username there. So we have those three elements. Now we need the last one, which will be the submit button. So say submit button. So it's a submit btn. Then over here we need to change this to submit btn because that's what's written over here. If I search, it will be this ID over here for the submit button, right? So yeah, we have access to those four elements. So right now what we need to do is to have some data which will actually compare with the data that the user is entering in the front end. So the user will be entering their username and password. So we need to have access to something from the database to compare the two details, which are from the front end, which are the input, and what's from the database or from the backend, which will be what's saved in the database, right? But because we not really focusing on the backend, we're just gonna create some dummy data which will represent what's coming from the database or from the backend, right? Then we'll compare what's coming from the front end, which is the input that the user has entered, with what we'll be comparing with, which is the saved data over here, right? So we need to compare the two. If they do not match, then we're not gonna allow the user to log in, and we're gonna show them some relevant message, right? Then if they are able to log in, then of course we're gonna take them to the dashboard, right? So yeah, we're gonna have some saved data here. We can just actually call it dummy saved data. So that's just a comment. Then we're gonna create a variable called saved data. Then we just need two things. We need the username and the password. So we say password will be a string of 1, 2, 3. So that will be the password. So this will represent what's saved in the database or from the backend, what's coming from the backend, right? So the username will be just cat, just to save time. Then I'm just gonna swap these two by pressing Alt, then the arrow up to get this field up. Then I'm just gonna write a comma there to avoid that error. Then yeah, this is the dummy data that will represent the data that's coming from the backend, right? So now what we need to do is to focus on the logic of actually logging in. So we need to create a function for handling the login process, right? So I'm gonna create a function. So just say login logic over here. So we're gonna create a function. I'm gonna call it login, which will need two things. It will need the saved data, which is what's coming from the backend, and the input data, which is coming from the front end, which is what the user is actually typing in. So because like I said, we don't have a backend, we're gonna have this saved data representing the data that's coming from the backend. Then the input data will just be the information or the details that's coming from the front end, which is what the users enter. We have access to that already. So you need the saved data. So this does not represent this, it's something different. So I'm just calling it the same thing so that you know it represents this, but it's not actually this variable here. It's just a parameter. So it's gonna be an object. So right now it will be empty. Then we also need the input data, which is what's coming from the front end. So it just be an empty object as well. So inside here we're gonna write our logic. So the first thing that we need to do is check if the user has entered something in the fields. So inside the username field and inside the password field, we need to check if the user has entered something, because if they leave it empty and they press the login button, we should not allow them to go to the dashboard, because there'll be no reason for actually having the login page if we're not actually validating the details that the user has entered. So if they don't enter anything inside the username field or the password field, we need to show them an error to show them that they need to actually fill in the details or something inside those fields, right? So to do that, we're just gonna have an if statement over here. So before that, I'm just gonna write some comments here. So this will basically just be an if else statement. So the if statement will say the input data dot username dot trim. So this trim will basically make sure that there's no white space. So if the user just presses space inside that input field, which will be the username field, and they just get in there and press space and go in the password field and press space by trying to trick us or try to trick our application, we are not going to allow that. So once they do that, they won't be able to log in. So this will remove all those spaces and it will be like the field is empty, right? So now we're gonna do the same thing on the password field. So just say 2 pipes for all. So this represents all. So it's saying if the input data dot username dot trim, so we're just saying the username needs to have a value. So if it has a value, and also the input data dot password dot trim. So we're gonna trim the field to make sure that there's no white space in there, to make sure that they actually enter something, right? So if that's the case, then we're gonna continue with our logic there. Otherwise, we're actually gonna disallow them from logging in and show them an error message, right? So we're gonna return an object which will have 2 properties, which will be the message that will display in the front end, and also another property which is called login, which will either be true or false. So in this case, because they've entered nothing in those fields, we're gonna make sure that the login is false, right? Which will make sure that they do not go to the dashboard page, right? So the message here will just say, please fill in all fields. So just telling them they need to actually fill in all the fields. So another property which is called login. So for the login, you're gonna make sure that it's false. So this will determine whether the user actually goes to the dashboard page or not. So it will determine whether they log in or not, or the login was successful or not, right? So over here we'll have the logic for actually logging in. We're gonna validate the details that they've entered. So over here we've already established that they've entered something in those fields. Otherwise, if they've entered nothing, we'll go over here. But inside here, if they've entered something, we need to validate those details or that information they've entered in those 2 fields, which is the username field and the password field, right? So we're gonna check if the input data, the username, or rather we need to actually check the saved data first. We need to compare the saved data with the input data. So we'll say the saved data, the username dot the saved data, the username is actually not equals to the input data, the username. So if the saved data, the username, which is this username over here, which is cat, if it's not equals to or is not the same as the username that the user has entered, so if they've entered maybe Jacob inside the username, so we'll deal with that just inside this if statement over here. So if they've entered that, if the details that the username they've entered is wrong, we just say wrong username, or we can say invalid username, but we just put it like that to make it simple, wrong username, so that they know they've entered a wrong username, right? And the login will still be false to make sure they don't go to the dashboard page. Then gonna have an else if statement to check for the password. So we're gonna do the same thing that's over here. We check the saved data and the input data. So instead of the username, we're gonna check the password now. We're gonna check the password. Then if the password is wrong, we're gonna just show them the message that wrong password. So we're gonna display wrong password, and the login will still be false to make sure they don't go to the dashboard page. Then otherwise, if everything is fine, so the username is correct and the saved password and the input password is correct, so we're just gonna make sure that they log in. So we can say login successful over here, login successful, then the login will be true. So once the username and the password is correct, then they'll be able to log in, right? So we have that. So that's the only login logic that we need. Then now we need to handle that submit button. So once they click on the submit button, we need to actually validate everything. So we can call this function inside the logic of actually clicking on that button. So once the event of clicking that button happens, we're gonna call this login logic, or login function rather. So now we're gonna handle submit button what happens when user submit the submit button, right? So we're just gonna call submit btn, then we're gonna call a function called onClick, which is available to this function, or rather to this element, or to every element that's available on the HTML that we've referenced over here. So even the parse will have the onClick. As long as it's an element, it has that onClick function or onClick method, right? So now we're gonna create an arrow function over here. Then inside here, we're gonna access this e. So this e is representing this element. So we need to access this element inside the function itself, so we can do some things on top of this element instead of just calling this element directly. So we can just do an arrow function right there. Then over here we have access to this element, which is this element. So this e represents this element over here, which is the submit button. So every element has a method called prevent default. So prevent default method basically disallows the button from actually refreshing the page. So right now if I click this button, it'll refresh the page. If we don't have the prevent default method called here, it'll refresh the page and the rest of the logic will not be called because it's a submit button, right? So if it's a submit button, it has some defaults that are there. We need to have the prevent default method called to make sure that the button does not submit or does not refresh the page, right? So we just call e.prevent default. So this will just prevent the defaults to make sure that the page does not refresh. So that's the whole point of that. Then what we're gonna do right now is just to see if our function, the logic function or the login function actually works. So we're gonna do a console log just below here, console.log. Then we're gonna do this, we're gonna say login. Then we're gonna have our save data, which will be the save data over there. So now we're calling the function, so it'll access this save data over there. Then we also need the input data. So we don't have the input data as yet, so we need to have some input data here. Now we're gonna have the save data here, the input data. Then it'll have a username as well and the password. So just to make sure that we get the username that's entered inside the username field, we'll say the username dot value, and we need to make sure that this value is in lower cases to make sure that we're actually checking everything exactly as it is. So we're gonna say to lower case. So this will basically, I think, also need to make sure that it's like that. So we call this function or this method, which will turn whatever string we have into lower cases to make sure we check exactly the way it is. So we need to check the save data and the input data, and to check both of them, we need to turn the input data into lower cases so that the save data can be checked exactly the way it is. So we'll have the save data which is coming from the backend, which will also be saved in lower cases. So we check the two to make sure that they match, right? So just to make sure that we don't see pop-ups in the input field, we'll just say autocomplete, and we're gonna turn it off. So we're gonna turn it off so that we don't see a pop-up when you click over there. So now over here you have access to those two. So also the password, we're just gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna say pass.value, but we're not gonna turn the password into lowercase because we need to make sure the password is exactly the way it is, because sometimes the uppercase and lower cases are used intentionally to make sure that the password is strong. So yeah, we're gonna check if the login function is working. So we have the input data and the save data. So it's gonna compare the two. So it's gonna compare whatever we're entering in here, right? So just to make sure that we actually see the what is being logged, we're gonna actually enter something here. Actually, we're gonna just click over here to see if whatever we've entered is right. So I've clicked over here, but there's nothing that's happening. So I think the reason for that is because we need to actually link our script, the login.js file, we need to link it to HTML so that it has access to these elements over here. So just before the closing body tag, we're gonna say script. So script, then we're gonna say ./login.js file. So that's the one we need. So now we have access to that file, and that file has access to the HTML fields over here. So when I refresh the page, then I'm gonna press the login button. Then now we see this message over here which says please fill in all fields, login, which is false over there. So if I could zoom in, so yeah, we have the message which says please fill in all fields, then the login is false over there, which is correct, which is exactly, let me just put this over there, which is exactly what's here. So the reason I'm getting that message is because we don't have anything in the username field and the password field. Also, if I just enter something in here and press login again, press login, I'll get the same message. So we should not be getting this message. So there's something wrong in our login logic or login function. So the reason for that is because of this or statement. So we need to make sure that we make sure the username and the password has something, right? So right now, if I attempt again, press the login button, we should see the please fill in all fields. If I enter something here, press the login button, you should see the same message says please fill in all fields. So we just needed to change the or operator there to an AND operator. All right, we have that. So now if I actually enter something here, press login, we get wrong username because it's checking this first. So if I enter the actual username, which is cat, which is exactly what's here, which is coming from the save data over here, so it's cat, so I'm entering cat over there. If I press login, we should see wrong password because the username is correct, so it checks this field first. If it's correct, it's gonna check this, then we're gonna get the relevant message. So if I press login, it says wrong password, right, and the login is still false, which is what it should be. Then now we can continue with the logic. So we already know this is working now. So what we need to do is to actually get the response data that we're getting. So right now, as if logged, we're getting this data over here, so you need to have access to this. So we're just gonna say access the response data. So it's the response data because once we click the submit button or the login button, we're getting some data, right, which will come from the backend actually. So now because we don't have a backend, we just created our own logic to simulate the backend data, right? So right now we just say const, then we're gonna say the response will be the login. So we're gonna call the login function. We're gonna say save data, then we're gonna say input data. Save data is this, then the input data is that, right? So okay, we have the response data over there. Then now we can actually have the logic of actually deciding whether they go to the dashboard page or they stay on the login page so that they can actually enter the right details, right? So once the login property here is true, they can go to the dashboard page. If the login property here or the field is false, then they'll stay on the login page until they actually enter the right details. So they can't do any other thing other than actually try to think of the right details. So if the login field is true, they can actually log in. They can actually go to the dashboard. Otherwise, they'll stay on the login. So I'm actually writing these comments so you can read them as I'm continuing, so you know what's gonna happen just below that comments, right? All those comments. So now I'm gonna say if the response, so as you can see, the response, the data that's coming from this login is this information here. So it's this data or that data or that data or that data, right? So we have access to message or login. So that is what will actually be in here in the response. So we have everything that's over there. We have access to the message and the login. So but the most important one is this login. So we need to check if the response data or response.login. As you can see, it gives us that autocomplete. So if the login is true, then we can actually allow them to log in. Then otherwise, if it's false, then we're gonna actually show them the error message, the relevant error message, right? So we're gonna say error message dot test content. So it actually just replace whatever we have right now or currently inside this error message, which is this over here. It will replace whatever we have currently with whatever we're gonna equate this to, right? So we're gonna say the test content will be equals to response dot message. So the message will be whatever will be displayed here or there or there or there. So whatever is there will be inside the error message, right? Which will be displayed to the user, right? So we have that will display once the login is false. So once they are unable to log in because they've entered the wrong password or the wrong username, or they've not entered anything, or they've missed one input field or more, right? So now we're gonna, if they've actually entered the right details, so the saved data and the input data are actually the identical or they're correct, we're gonna set a variable in the local storage. So we're gonna store the username in the local storage so we can have access to that username and actually display it. What I'm gonna do right now is just to set that variable, which will be the username, which will be saved in the local storage. And the local storage, the good thing about it is that it actually makes sure that whatever is set is actually accessible in the current website that you're in. So if you go to google.com, if there's something that they're saving in the local storage, it'll still be there if you come again tomorrow and go to google.com, right? So the local storage is somewhat how database is, but not exactly. It's just saving that information in your browser, right? So if you use a different browser, it won't actually have that information that's on the local storage that's saved on Chrome, right? So you just save this information in the browser, in the current browser, right? So we're gonna say local storage dot set item. So we're gonna set the username to, actually it needs to be dynamic. So the username will be the input data dot username. So we're saving the username, we're saving this username that the user has entered, which should be the correct one because the login will be true. So we're saving that username in the local storage on a variable called username, right? So we'll have access to this variable on all the pages on the application, right, in the browser that we're using right now, right? So now the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that once they've actually clicked on the login button and the login is true over there, so the response to the login is true, we're gonna actually take them to the dashboard page, right? And it'll display their name with some message, right? So we say document.location.assign. So this is just to take them to another URL. So we'll take them to the dashboard page. So we'll say /dashboard.html. So we'll take them to the HTML file. So yeah, that's all we need to do. So just to explain what's going on here, or what's going on in this function or in this method, which is on click method, which is what happens when they click on the button, the login button. So over here, we're just preventing the defaults that are on this button, which will be refreshing the page. And yeah, it's basically trying to submit the form, but we don't have a form. So I'm just doing this so that when you're using a form, you can actually have access to this and actually use it. It will not submit the form, it will just keep you on that page, and you can decide what happens next, which will be everything that's over there, right? So it will prevent all the defaults there. Then the next thing over here, we're just getting that input data or whatever the users entered in the front end, which is the username and the password. So we're getting the username and the password that has been entered in the front end in those fields, which will be these fields, right? The username and the password, right? So to access those values, we just say username the value. The username is this variable over there. We have access to it, so we have access to that element. So we're just getting the value, then we're turning that to lowercase to make sure that we compare the save data and the input data to make sure they are both in lower cases, and we're comparing it in lower cases, right? But for the password, you don't need to change the value to lowercase because there are some cases, and actually every time the password has upper cases and lower cases, right? So we don't really need to turn everything into lowercase or uppercase, right? So yeah, that's what's happening there. Just getting the input data, which is what the users entered in the front end. Then right here, we're just accessing the data that's coming from the backend, or somehow like how the data comes from the backend, right? So we just created the logic that will be happening in the backend over there, but we're doing everything in the front end. So we're just simulating how the data will come from the backend, right? So it will come as an object like that, which has properties message and login. The login will either be true or false. The message can be anything, just to show a message in the front end with the relevant message to show them they did something wrong, right? So just getting all that data inside this response variable over there. So it will have those two properties, the message and the login. It will be saved in here with the relevant data that's inside there, right? Then once we have access to that response, we're gonna check if the login is true. So we're gonna check if the login is true. If it's true, then we're gonna set the local storage. We're gonna set a variable in the local storage called username, and we're gonna save it as the username that the user has entered right now, right, in the front end, right? So we're doing this just so that in the dashboard page we can actually have access to that username, and we can display that username in the dashboard page, right? Then over here, we're just making sure that once the login is true, they're actually redirected to the dashboard page, right? So once they click on the login button and the login details are correct, they'll go to the dashboard page. Then otherwise, if the login is false, then we'll just show them an error message, which will give them some information of what they've done wrong, right? So that's what's happening inside here. So yeah, then we're gonna test this right now. So if I go over here and try to log in, it will give us that message which says please fill in all fields. That's because of this line over here. So the login is false, the response to the login is false, so it will go over here and it will replace the whatever is inside the error message with the message that's there, which is please fill in all fields. If I literally try to write anything inside the username and press again, we'll still get the same message. If I type anything inside the password field, so both fields are not empty, so we should see a different message over there. So if I click over there, it says wrong username. It says wrong username because it checks the username, then checks the password. So the username is wrong, so say cat, which is the correct username, which is what's in the saved data over there. So now I'm gonna click login again, and it will say wrong password because this is correct but this is incorrect, right? So now if I actually enter the right details and press 1 2 3, which is this password over there, so I press 1 2 3, then if I press login, it will redirect me to the dashboard page, as you can see. But we have that over there, but we're going to replace that with the relevant message, and it will also contain the username of the login user, right? So that's what we need to focus on right now. In this file, I think everything is fine. Then in the dashboard page, we just need to remove this. So I'm going to remove that over there inside the dashboard.html file. When I refresh, then we have an empty box like that. The user can only access this page once they've logged in, so don't need to worry about that. So inside the dashboard.js file, we need to have access to this welcome message paragraph over there. Selecting elements, so we're gonna select that welcome message. So I'll say welcome msg, will be document.getElement by id. Then just paste that, which is welcome-msg, which is this ID over there, right? So now we have that. So now what we can do is to actually have that welcome message. So we're gonna say display the welcome message. So we'll say welcome msg dot text content will be whatever we're gonna type over there. So right now I'm just gonna type ABC just so we can see the difference. So I'm gonna type ABC. If I save the file, we don't see anything, and the reason for that is because in the HTML file, the dashboard.html file, we don't have access to the script file, so we need to link it. So say script, then the source will be /dashboard.js file, dashboard.js. So now if I save the file, as you can see, we see ABC there, but we have access to the username of the logged in user. So if I go and inspect and go to, let me zoom out, if I go to the application over here, so just make sure you right click, go to inspect, or can press F12 on your keyboard, it'll pop up this. Usually it pops it out on the right hand side over here, but I just made sure that it docks it in a separate window, but usually you see it like that, but I just wanted it to be like that, right? So what we're gonna do is gonna go to the application. So if you don't see application on this navigation here, just click on this arrow and go to application. Then we're gonna go to a section we say storage. Then we're gonna click on this arrow on local storage. Then you can click on whatever application you're on right now. So we have this key over here, which is the variable which we've saved, which is the username, and it has this value cat. So we have access to that value, so we can display it in this dashboard page, right? So in the dashboard.js file, what we can do is get the local storage value. So we can get the local storage value by getting the username. So the username will be local storage dot get item. Then we're gonna get the username. So here just type the key. So the key here is username. So we just get the key, then it will give us the value. So the value will be saved inside here. So just getting the key there. So now we can use this inside here. So we can say hi, then the username. So this is just templating in JavaScript. So inline templating, so it's just making sure that we have a string, then inside that string we can actually access some, or we can actually display some variables, right? So we're just using the backticks. So just backticks, which is what's next to the one on your keyboard on the left hand side. So just click it twice, it'll give you this backticks. Then inside here you can type any string you want. Then to actually include a variable, you just type a $, then a closing and opening curly braces. Then inside there you can type your variable, which is the username. Then here I can type a comma. Then I can say welcome to your dashboard. Welcome to your dashboard. Then I can save that. And then now if I save this, then you see hi cat, welcome to your dashboard. But if the username was a different one, which I'll just demonstrate right now, you will see a different name over here. So now I'm gonna go to the login page or the login.js file and change the save data to Jack or Joe for it to be short. I'll change the username to Joe. Then now if I go to the login page, so over here, of course, if I just log in, it will show me that validating correctly, enter something wrong, get wrong username, then we get Joe, wrong password, then of course the password is 123. Then now once we go to the dashboard, it should show this username in the dashboard instead of cat, because we are changing it every time we are logging in. So if I log in, it should show us hi Joe, welcome to your dashboard. So yeah, that's the whole process. Let me just explain everything from top to bottom so that if you've missed something, you can get a better understanding. So the first thing we did is we created this HTML file which has the login form. So you have the paragraph for displaying the error message, you have the input for the username, which has the placeholder username and the ID of username. Then here we're just turning off the autocomplete so that when we click on this field, it doesn't show some of the values we've entered previously in other websites where they have the ID of username. So also on this password over here, we're just making sure the placeholder is password so that the user knows this is a password field. Then we have the ID of pass. Then this is the submit button, but we've named it login. So this is what will be displayed over here. Just go back. So this is the login button. So yeah, it has the ID of submit-btn. Then here we're just referencing the login.js file so that it has access to these elements. If we remove this, then everything that we've written in the login.js file will not actually work because it does not have access to these elements over here. So we need to make sure this line is there, right? Then in the login.js file, which is the important one, here we're just selecting all the elements that we need, which is the error message paragraph, which is this one here. So you need that element. We need the username input field, which is this one. We need the password field, which is this one. Also need the submit button, which is this button over here, right? Then here we just trying to write some dummy data. So like I said, we don't have the backend, so we can actually have call something from the backend, right? So we have some saved data, so some dummy saved data which represent the data that's coming from the backend, right? So that's what's over here. Then over here we're just deciding what happens once the user clicks on the login button. So the first thing we did here is we're just preventing the defaults that the button comes with. The default is that once the user clicks on the submit button or whatever button is there, it will refresh the page, and you don't want that to happen because it will not actually show those error messages that we want to show to the user so that they see what they've done wrong, right? Then over here we have the input data, which is what the user has entered in the front end. So they are the username that they've entered in here and the password that they've entered in here. So we're just getting those values and putting them in an object called input data, which has two properties or two fields called username and password. Then over here we're just getting the response, which is coming from this login function over here. So it's gonna return this data over there, or this data, or that data, or that data. So it has the message and the login, right? So it needs two parameters. So it needs the saved data and the input data. Then we're just gonna put those two over there. So already have the saved data, which is that, the input data, which is that over there. So it will return the relevant data, which will have two fields, which is the message and the login, right? So once we have that, we're just gonna see if the user is actually entered the right details. So if the login is true, we'll actually set the username variable or the username key in the local storage and set it to whatever username they've entered, which is correct. And also we're gonna redirect them to the dashboard because they've successfully logged in, right? Otherwise, if they've not successfully logged in, we're gonna show them an error message to show them what they've done wrong, right? Then over here in the logic for logging in, we need two things. We need the saved data, which is coming from the backend. We also need the input data, which is coming from the front end, what they've entered. So over here, the first line, we're just checking if they've entered something inside the two fields, which is the password and the username field. If they've entered something, then we're gonna continue with our logic in here. So we're gonna check if the password and the username is correct. So this line, we're just checking if the username is correct, or rather the username is incorrect. Then on this line, we're checking if the password is incorrect. If it's incorrect, then we're gonna show the message wrong username. If the username is incorrect, if the password is incorrect, we're gonna show the password is incorrect. Then otherwise everything is fine, then we're gonna show login successful. We're not really gonna show this. This is just for reference. Then what we need is this. So we're gonna say login is true, but for the other if statements, we're gonna say login is false, right? So over here we're just making sure if they've entered nothing, we show please fill in all fields. So if they've entered nothing in the username field or the password field, we're gonna show this line, right? And we're gonna show this relevant message. So that's what's happening in there. Then in the dashboard page or the dashboard.html file, we need to have this welcome message over here. You can name it anything you want, but I just called it welcome-msg for the paragraph. So the ID of the paragraph is that. Then we have this script over here, which is referencing this JS file. So we need to make sure that we actually reference the dashboard.js file. If we don't do this, then the logic that we have in the JS file, it will not work. So we need that line. Then we also need to have the logic for the dashboard page. So we just getting selecting the welcome message paragraph over there. Then we just getting that username that's saved in the local storage over here. Then over here we're just displaying whatever we want, but the important thing here is just the username. We just want to display so the user knows that they've actually logged in and they see their name, so it shows them their username over there. So every time a user logs in, it will show their username. So yeah, that's everything, guys. So if you have any questions, you can just write them in the comment section and I'll be happy to actually answer any question that you have regarding this. And of course, like I said, everything will be in the GitHub, so I'll actually upload everything. If you want to access this, you'll see everything in the GitHub. I'll link it down there. Then you can just use it as the baseline for everything that you're doing as you're following the video. If you see something wrong, if you want to reference everything, you can see the code on my GitHub. Alright, that's gonna do it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't done this yet, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever I release new content. And lastly, like this video, guys. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye.